أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ومولانا القاسم المصطفى محمد. I seek refuge from the shaitan and I begin in the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. I send my greetings to the seal of prophethood, to the members of his holy house, and I send my condolences and my greetings to the true host of tonight's commemoration, the Imam of our time, Imam Mahdi alayhi salam. May Allah hasten his arrival. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's with the permissions of the elders in the crowd and especially our scholar, I'd say Sabiri, that I will spend a few minutes with you tonight for the benefit of the youth. And I know the program is running slightly late, so it's my very intention to keep this short and sweet for you. با اجازه بزرگان مجلس به خصوص سید صابری فقط چند دقیقه وقت شما عزیزان رو میگیرم به زبان انگلیسی برای جوانان گروه. Tonight, I wish everybody here speaks Farsi or could at least benefit from my dear friend Agha Mehdi's recitation of the poet. What a wonderful poem, really. Tonight, we gather here, as do millions of others in every corner of the world, to commemorate and to remember the events of Ashura. And specifically at our center, tonight it belongs to Hazrat Ali Akbar, the son of Imam Hosein himself. And you all know he was in fact the first of the Bani Hashim to step into the battlefield, into the plains of Karbala, knowing full well that he would be greeted by his great-grandfather in a short time. As Mehdi Jan mentioned, anyone else that went before him was part of the companions. And of course, the Imam himself would ask them not to go. He would tell them, you don't have to go. But with Ali Akbar, Imam Hussein helped him, get him dressed in his appropriate attire of war, and sent him to his destiny, which was to defend the holy message of his great-grandfather. And so we gather to remember him, and I find it befitting for us to think why we remember Ashura. And why do we need to remember the events that led to Ashura? And I find Ali Akbar to be the perfect person to help remind us why we need to remember Ashura. Of course, you all know well, again, as my dear brother Al-Mehdi mentioned in his poem, Ali Akbar resembled the Holy Prophet more than anybody else. And wasn't it befitting that Imam Hosein would send the person that resembles the Prophet more than anybody else as the first of Bani Hashim to sacrifice his life? And it wasn't just the physical appearance that resembled the Holy Prophet, but it was Ali Akbar's behavior and mannerism. And it was his khulq, it was essentially the moral character, the moral personality of Hazrat Ali Akbar that resembled the Prophet more than anybody else. And so he steps onto the plains of Karbala. And he's the one that anybody who would miss the Holy Prophet would request to visit him to remember the Holy Prophet. And sure enough, he's the first of Bani Hashim to step up and defend the message, the true message of Islam. And so let's think why we remember what happened 14 centuries ago in a land called Karbala. And briefly, let's talk about what remembering means. I mean, remembering has different levels, I guess, right? We have the most basic level of remembering, which is essentially to commit to mind, to recall. In other words, I need to remember to pick up some milk before I get home. And if I fail at it, it's really not a big deal. The consequences are relatively light. My wife is nice. But the next level of remembrance is not just to take note of something, but it's to actually make it a part of us. I remember the face of my grandma. I may memorize or remember a surah. And again, to fail at this, the consequences are relatively few. But the highest level of remembrance, what we do, and we are but a drop in the ocean of humanity that in these days and these nights gathers to remember and to commemorate the events and the personalities that later became to be called Ashura. And it's this commemoration that without a doubt is the greatest form of remembrance. And I have to pause to say, the older I get, the more I realize you have to be blessed to come to a majlis like this. It's not really our choice. We have to be called to it. But this is the greatest form of remembrance, this commemoration. And the proceedings of the 10 days of Muharram in the past 1400 years have been remembered in its highest form. And a commemoration that's been comprehensive, it's alive and it's well. And it's not only a commemoration and remembrance of the mind, like let's remember on the calendar that it is Muharram, the first of Muharram. But we also engage our body. We dress in black. The processions that draw millions, literally millions, to majlises small and large, to the land of Karbala itself. So not just the remembrance of the mind, but the remembrance of the body, and certainly the emotional remembrance, the emotional act, the tears that are shed, and the feeling of suffering and pain that we try to share with those who went through this horrific event in human history are alive and well. But again, most significantly, it's the deep spiritual act of remembrance and commemoration that bears the most weight. It's this commemoration of a great event in history of humankind, not just the history of Shia, not just the history of Islam, not just the history of us, but a history of humankind. This was a human event. And when we take such an event and we look at its spiritual nature, we have to think that that God blew a bit of His Spirit into us, and so it allows us to connect with Him in communion. And so, from a human perspective, we think of the martyrdom of Imam Hosein and Ali Akbar 1400 years ago in a place called Karbala to be more than just an event that occurred. Because in God's perspective and in His point of view, for which we are a small resemblance of or strive to be, God is outside the limitations of time. Yes, it was 1400 years ago, but God is outside the limitations of time. He's outside the limitations of a physical location. And so, yes, this occurred in the land of Karbala, but from God's perspective, there is no limitation in space and location. And so, in God's metaphysical realm, Karbala is not a thing of the past, it is a thing of the now, it is a thing of the future. And Karbala didn't occur in a place limited by the name Karbala. It goes well beyond the physical limitations of the plains, of a desert. So in this metaphysical realm, and in this meta-historical incident, above the conventional history, remembering Ashura lifts us in a spiritual realm into communion with God. And in this metaphysical realm, the events of Karbala are present in His sight. And we are remembering a present act because we are a spiritual being. And we're entering God's time, not ours. And so we enter the present as well. And we are reliving the moments. And so that is really what we mean when we say every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. We remember it by re-entering it, reliving it every day during the proceedings of Ashura. Assalamu ala al-Hosein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hosein wa ala awlad al-Hosein wa ala ashab al-Hosein. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Beautiful.